All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College World podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be discussing Jim Knowles to Penn State as their new defensive coordinator, what that potentially will mean for Ohio State, and can he be that missing piece that the Nittany Lions have been looking for to help them advance to a national championship after a close loss to Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl in the semifinal, and yet another season where they lose a close game to Ohio State, looking to get over those respective humps. James Franklin goes out and makes a splash of a hire. When Jim Knowles got to Ohio State, their defense was in peril. They looked very, very bad when he first got there. In the last two seasons for the Buckeyes, they were amongst the top in CFB in numerous different statistical categories. This past year, they were first in yards, scoring defense, and red zone defense. I mean, they were so good in the red zone. This team was so dominant. Of course, they had a lot of seniors. They had the transfer of Caleb Downs, a tremendous amount of players who had stuck around instead of declaring for the NFL. So they certainly had a leg up in terms of experience, and that's one thing you're going to need when it comes to trying to learn this scheme. So in year one, will he be able to accomplish is going to be the biggest question mark that we'll get to momentarily. This is a massive hire, though, Nick. I certainly didn't expect it. $3.1 million per season over 3 years, fresh off a national title. You just don't see moves like this. Tom Allen was fired as Indiana head coach, came over, coordinated a very good defense. And they've always had good defenses under Franklin. That's one thing Knowles said that really attracted him to this job, outside of being a Pennsylvania native, of course. But a good defense, they're looking to be great, and I think that's what Knowles can potentially bring to the table. What do you make of this whole situation, Nick? Kind of a coaching carousel, domino effect where Tom Allen departs and it works out for Franklin and company.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting move when you look at Penn State's defense this past year wasn't a bad defense by any stretch of the imagination. It was actually an elite defense, right? 7th in the nation in total defense this past season. They gave up about 4.67 yards per play, roughly around 294 yards per game. Good numbers. Of course, Ohio State had better numbers, 4.19 yards per play given up on defense and 254.6 yards per game given up. So that's a healthy jump between 1st and 7th there. But these are two top 10 defenses. When you plug Knowles in, I think that really does push Penn State a little bit higher. Of course, Jim Knowles, he's been around the game for a while, mostly as a coordinator. He was the only time as a head coach was at Cornell for 5 years and did not really have any success at the FCS level. Of course, Ivy League, so a little bit tougher to do things there, but they were not very good at all during his tenure at Cornell, 26-34. That is his alma mater, of course, an important note. He did grow up in Philadelphia. He was at Duke for a while as defensive coordinator and helped those teams out. Then had a lot of success at Oklahoma State, and the most recently successful stint for him was the 2 years at Ohio State, where this team ended up winning a national title. He was able to put together a really solid defense, and you saw his defense have success against Penn State in 2023 and in 2024, where they scored 12 points and 13 points in those two contests. So they were able to stuff the team that he ended up joining. $3.1 million. That's a lot of money, right? One of the highest paid coordinators in college football, if not the highest paid. A ton of money to pay a defensive coordinator. But I think James Franklin knows that he has to do something to get over the hump. This is a team that's returning a ton of talent on the defensive side of the ball and the offensive side of the ball. And this is the time to strike. Get a strike while the iron's hot. This Penn State team went to the semifinals. They played good football this year, but again, it just wasn't enough to get them over the finish line to the national championship game and ultimately winning that national title. James Franklin thought he had to go do this, and he went out and did it. You land the best coordinator, best X's and O's. That scheme he runs is phenomenal. We're going to talk about that in a second. And this could really be a big game-changing thing. Penn State has a lot of talent. They recruit a lot of talent well. This could be the one piece they need to finally get over that hump and finally win a national championship for the first time in really decades.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think is going to bring a significant underrated boost is recruiting to that Philadelphia area. Penn State has actually struggled a good bit in that region when it comes to recruiting. Deep ties for Knowles. He's from the area, of course, and, again, the ties that he has to those high schools and, the relationships he's built in that area is certainly going to help them be more desirable, and it should be. That's the home state of this Penn State football team. You should be able to recruit, especially in the big cities where there's a good amount of talent there, the nucleus of the state, home of the Eagles that are about to, play for a Super Bowl title in a couple of days here. So that's one thing that they've really struggled with. I think it's definitely been disappointing for this coaching staff, and that's a giant boost that they're going to have for at least the next couple of seasons. We'll see if that can last long term, Nick. Again, only a 3-year deal. Hopefully he can establish more ties with the rest of this coaching staff in that area that can keep those going long term for as long as Franklin is here. But there's a lot of benefits here, not just on the field, but the off the field too, is something I think is definitely going to be underrated. And I think maybe in transfer portals moving forward, he might be able to pluck some higher known talent as well for the defensive side of the ball. Again, it's a small deal, Nick. Obviously contracts in sports, we know they really don't mean much when it comes to coaches. They could sign a 10-year deal, be there for 2, or sign a 3-year and be there for 6. So this could work out for the long term. All signs right now point, and indicate this will be short. But there's going to be a lot of, short-term boosts still for Penn State to reap.
Yeah, there's a lot of short-term bursts. This is a guy that's going to come in and immediately flip your defense around. This was already a good defense he's inheriting for Penn State, better than the unit that he inherited at Ohio State when he got to Columbus. So I think this could be a quicker turnaround. There's a ton of talent in the state of Pennsylvania. And the high school recruits, there's a lot of talent in the state of Pennsylvania that gets out of the state and goes to other schools, that guys that will leave the portal and want to join a high-profile school like Penn State. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to recruit as a guy that grew up in the state of Pennsylvania and a talented defensive coordinator. I thought Tom Allen did a good job with his defenses 1 year after his previous couple years at Indiana, where he was the head coach. Now he heads to Clemson, which is a move that I think is good for Clemson as well. They got to highlight the fact that Allen to Clemson makes sense. Him and Garrett Riley, the two coordinators for Dabo. Dabo was trying to find the right coordinator pieces after losing his two previous coordinators in Venables and his offensive coordinator, Tony Elliott, who ended up going and taking head coaching jobs and really kind of gutted that offensive staff and put it to a subpar level for the Clemson Tigers. Now you bring in two elite players, or coaches, that is, a young mind and Riley last year, and then now you bring in Allen, who's a veteran defensive coordinator that's been around. I think this is a good move for Clemson as well. Knowles is a very talented coach. The X's and O's for him are phenomenal. He's going to really get this defense firing in all cylinders. The numbers were phenomenal at Ohio State, and I think that the talent he's working with at Penn State right now is really strong. This team has to get over the hump with the way that things are. The 12-team playoff certainly gives them a better chance to do so. We saw them already get to the semifinals this year. Bringing in a guy like Knowles, the expectation should certainly be a national title game appearance for this Penn State Nittany Lions team.
Yeah, and we'll break down that scheme. It's a 4-2-5. It's a very complex one at that. This is a team that, at Ohio State, they didn't blitz often. They got great work from its front four, something, Penn State's pretty known for. Of course, Abdul Carter's going to go, top 3 in the draft, it appears. It really allowed their coverage not be stressed all that much, while at the same time, they had great rotations in coverage. I mean, the communication was top-notch, and I think one thing they do is just the defensive backs are coached up so well. They do a great job of understanding leverage and playing off of each other. This is a team, when you watched film of them, there was not many open holes at all. I remember Drew Aller came to Columbus a couple years ago, and he looked abysmal just because this coverage was so hard for a young quarterback to diagnose. There was nobody open. It was hard to make plays. A lot of confusing stuff. They show a lot of 3-high looks, play all kinds of coverages off of that. Look at Tampa 2, cover 3, whatever it may be. A lot of different variations. This is a great scheme, Nick. It worked at Oklahoma State. I thought Oklahoma State in his final year had the best defense in football. They had a lot of great statistical numbers. The top offenses they played were certainly, in flux, and that was with pretty limited talent. Nick, at Oklahoma State, goes to the Buckeyes. They improved. It took them a year, though, but they finally got there before being elite these past 2 years. The biggest concern with me for Penn State is it's going to take time. This is not a scheme you just plug in, regardless of the talent level, and it's going to show up. And I think for Penn State, that might be the alarming thing, is that if this scheme's going to take a year to break in, Nick, right now is our best chance probably ever to win a national title, with the top 2 running backs coming back in Singleton and Allen, and then Aller at quarterback, a veteran offensive line as well. This is go time for Penn State, and I would hate for them to be held back trying to implement this new scheme that we know can work, and eventually, once executing properly with enough experience, can be top notch. That would be the only concern for me, though, and it would be a gut wrench if that's the case.
That would certainly be a gut wrench, and it would be tough for Penn State fans, right? That would be difficult to swallow, considering you're right. There's a lot of talent returning right now. Danny Dennis Sutton on the edge there, coming back. Zane Durant, who was solid for this team. Tony Rojas and Dominic DeLuca at linebackers are all returning. The secondary returns a lot of talented pieces as well, with Elliott Washington, who I was impressed with, and A.J. Harris playing cornerbacks, plus Zakai Wheatley at free safety is a really solid, versatile piece in the secondary. I think it is concerning, right? There might be a tough adjustment early on, but I think you can kind of ease your way into that as the season goes on. And when you get into those tougher games towards the end of the season, this defense will be firing on all cylinders. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it, right? In the new system, you can drop a game or two and still be just fine playing in the Big Ten. It's a gauntlet of a conference. If Penn State loses a game early in conference play, or loses a game or two early in conference play, I don't think it's going to be the biggest deal in the world if they can get back to the college football playoff. And really, at that point, I think the defense will be playing at full strength and get to a full level. We saw Ohio State drop a game this year to Michigan, and they were able to still sort it out and go win a national title. I think you got to just get to the big dance, do your football, play hard enough football to get to the big dance. And when you have a defense coached by Knowles, I would take that team any day of the week in the college football playoff. I think the new format benefits a school like Penn State greatly, as long as they get a draw that's semi-reasonable in the college football playoff. I think the ceiling is very high for this defense, even if the adjustment early on will be difficult.
Yeah, you alluded to some of those guys on defense that have been great. Vilbert Smith was one that really stepped up in the playoffs and was impressive for them. Very deep defensive line with a lot of size. At times throughout the year, though, they just didn't seem as effective as they should be. Abdul Carter, of course, was doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but sometimes they failed to get play from other players. Against Oregon, they weren't all that great. Against Boise State, of course, they did it against the run, but their pass rush was pretty weak, quite frankly, and they couldn't really cover for some reason. So sometimes this defense can be disappointing in the first matchup, or the only matchup that is against Ohio State. The D-line didn't look as strong as it should have been, considering the offensive line was at its weakness, at the weakest point of the year for the Buckeyes, and they didn't show up like you would have expected them to. So that's one thing I certainly want to see Knowles be able to do is untap potential with this D-line, because they have a lot of talent. Play up to their standard in more difficult games. Because that Oregon game, I picked Penn State to win that game in the Big 12 title because I thought their defense would be good. Their defense wasn't good at all, but their offense was shockingly impressive. So a lot of excitement for Penn State. Will Jim Knowles be that missing piece? I certainly think he can be. They should make the playoffs again. I think their win total for the next season is 10.5, so they should certainly be in, even if they lose a major matchup, Nick, in the road on Columbus, November 1st against that Ohio State team. I know a lot of people are pretty upset that Jim Knowles left. It's business at the end of the day. But when it comes to sports and athletics, you're not going to let things go, Nick. These guys are going to be aware that he left them right after accomplishing such a great feat together. And I think both of these sides are going to be looking for bragging rights because, Ohio State, they didn't look to pay him that, per diem that he's getting from the Nittany Lions. So a lot of bad blood. And, of course, Penn State has not won that game in so long. This is going to be their best opportunity to do so in a while.
This is their best opportunity to do so in a while. Certainly, this is an Ohio State team that's losing a lot of talent on defense. You can't really blame Knowles for bolting, right? You get a huge payday, $3.1 million. You're already losing a lot of your talented players on defense. Penn State looking to win this game for the first time since 2016 when they beat Ohio State in Happy Valley. They haven't won in Columbus since 2011. That was a very long time ago, and that was not a very good Ohio State team that was dealing with some sanctions and going through some issues at that moment in time. So, this has been a long time, right? We're looking at 10 plus years since they won in Columbus, nearly 10 years since they won straight up, and obviously they're hungry in Penn State, right? They want to start winning. This is a team that they feel like they're a blue blood in college football. They have yet to win a national title in a very long time. Like I said, they have struggled to get over the hump, and James Franklin is a really good coach, but we've questioned whether or not he can get over the hump. Now with the expanded playoff, there's no excuses for Penn State. They should be in the playoff every single year, and the schedule next year, it has some tough tests, certainly, right? Traveling to Ohio State, that's not a joke, and hosting Oregon, Indiana, you do get favorable draws getting both those teams at home. Outside of that, trip to Iowa, trip to Michigan State, trip to UCLA, these are all games they should win. This team should win 10 games, 10, 11 games next year with the way that the schedule's set up. No non-conference schedule to really concern you at all, just ease your way into it. Bringing in Knowles, they paid him a lot of money because they think he's the guy that can get the job done. At the end of the day, they won't be upset paying $3.1 million if this guy goes out and helps coach this defense to win a national title. That's the business at the end of the day. Knowles, he took the biggest offer. I cannot blame him at all. He bolted, took the money. No issue with that at all. Ohio State has a lot to figure out. We'll obviously talk about that throughout the offseason, but this is a great move for Penn State. This is a team that's really good on offense, really good on defense, and a favorable schedule. They should be in a great position to potentially win the conference and a national title. This does move the needle heavily for me. I trust what this defense can do under Jim Knowles.
I don't think it was fully on the money. This is a team that he grew up admiring, a program that he ended up loving growing up as a kid in Penn State, and he has an opportunity to go compete at a high level for such a great program, and of course, make that money on top of that as well. So, I think there's a lot of factors that went into this. I think it's great for Penn State. One thing I will note is Jim Knowles has never inherited a good defense before, like what you call, Nick, an elite defense. He doesn't have to come in here and do all kinds of crazy turnarounds. So even though he's going to implement this complex scheme that could be a little challenging at first, it's not trying to figure out what guys do best, with a blank sheet. James Franklin knows what these guys do best, and I think them being able to collaborate, early and often is going to lead to, great enhancements in this defense early on. So I don't anticipate them struggling all that much. I think there'll be some kinks in terms of communication and trying to get guys to play in coverage from time to time. Nothing that I think will cost them games. But I think this is very, very exciting if you're a Penn State fan, because again, this guy's never inherited a good defense. It's always been come in, do what you can to fix it, and that's a very stressful task, Nick. Not much stress here with Penn State.
No, very talented roster. Right? He's inheriting an incredibly strong and talented roster that I think can really do a lot for him. He's got a really good defensive line, solid linebacking core as well that could just use a little bit of polishing, and then a secondary unit that I think is trending in the right direction. This seems to be the best opportunity to do so. You strike while the iron's hot. You got to go find a way to make this defense compete early on. I think you can certainly do that with the way that this is all set up. I like what this defense has on paper, and I think they're going to go do some more work to get this situated. Obviously, you got to find a way to make sure that everyone can understand the scheme, and that is tough early on, right? Certainly not going to sugarcoat it. This is a tough system to understand fully, but I trust what Jim Knowles can do. There's a lot of talent here, and I think this is a talented defense that he could work with and develop into a superstar unit.
Yeah, come the end of the year, they should be clicking at a very high level. So this will be interesting to see how this works out. Of course, we'll talk about this team throughout the offseason before any official predictions, but I know a lot of people are eyeing down Penn State as a national championship favorite. It's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe.